The boy's ribs showed through his torn shirt, but his eyes blazed with defiance as 3 grown men cornered him behind Nora Caldwell's bakery. It was high noon in Copper Creek, and the autumn sun cast harsh shadows across the dusty alley where hunger was about to ignite a powder keg of secrets. Nora stepped out to discard stale dough when she heard the commotion. Deputy Marshal Wade Langston had the child by the scruff of his neck, shaking him with brutal indifference, while Baker Thompson and mine foreman Curtis Valentine watched with a predatory glint in their eyes. The boy couldn't be more than 12, all sharp angles and grime, with hair so matted it resembled a bird's nest. A shiver ran down her spine. Smart women in Copper Creek looked the other way, especially widows clinging to their livelihoods. But something in the child's desperate gaze echoed the memory of her own son, lost to fever 3 years ago. Nora's hands trembled as she clutched her apron. Every fiber of her being urged her to retreat, to safeguard the precarious peace she'd forged from the embers of her shattered marriage. But those sunken cheeks, those pleading eyes— "Let him go," she commanded, her voice ringing with unexpected authority. Wade spun around, his weathered face contorted in irritation. "This little varmint's been pilfering from honest folk for weeks, Mrs. Caldwell. Time he learned what happens to thieves in a civilized town." The boy's stomach rumbled with such ferocity it reverberated off the brick walls. Nora witnessed the shame darken his features, saw him try to shrink into non-existence. She recognized that look, a chilling reflection of her own despair after the funeral, when the town gossiped about the hapless widow who couldn't even save her child. "What did he steal?" she inquired, taking a step forward despite the alarm bells clamoring in her mind. Baker Thompson brandished a solitary biscuit, scarcely larger than his hand. "Filched it right off my cooling rack. That's theft, plain and simple." The sheer absurdity of the situation struck her like a physical blow. 3 grown men terrorizing a starving child over a biscuit worth a pittance. But she instinctively knew this wasn't about petty larceny. This was about dominance, about reminding everyone in Copper Creek what transpired when you lacked wealth or a protector. Nora reached into her apron pocket and produced a silver dollar, more than she could comfortably afford. "Here, for the biscuit and any inconvenience." Wade's grip tightened on the boy's collar. "Now hold your horses, Mrs. Caldwell. We can't just let every petty criminal off the hook." "His name is Tobias," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. "Tobias Mercer." The surname landed with the force of a thunderclap. Thompson visibly recoiled, his complexion paling. Wade's hand relaxed momentarily as he exchanged a knowing glance with Valentine. Nora registered the reaction, but couldn't decipher its meaning. Why would a name hold such significance for these men? What secret did they share about this child that triggered such unease? "Take your dollar and keep it," Wade said, his tone noticeably altered, laced with hesitation. "But boy, you stay away from Main Street from now on, you hear me?" They released Tobias and hurried away, their heavy boots stirring up dust devils, yet Nora noticed their furtive glances back, as if the child represented a threat unseen. Tobias remained rooted to the spot, his frail body trembling. Nora approached cautiously, as if approaching a wounded bird. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" she asked softly. His laugh was hollow and tinged with bitterness. "Proper meal, lady? I haven't had one of those since before..." "Before what?" But Tobias only shook his head, retreating toward the alley's exit. "You shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have helped me. They'll remember, and they'll make you pay for it." "Who will make me pay? What aren't you telling me?" Fear flickered across his features, but beneath it lay something deeper: recognition. As if he understood precisely why his name had elicited such a reaction, and why that knowledge could jeopardize them both. Nora spent the remainder of the afternoon watching Tobias devour 3 loaves of bread, 2 apples, and a jar of preserves as if he hadn't encountered food in weeks. A horrifying realization that likely held true. She'd ushered him inside through the back entrance, shielded from the prying eyes of Main Street. But even within the sanctuary of her kitchen, the boy remained vigilant, his body coiled like a spring prepared to flee. "Your family name," she broached cautiously, refilling his glass of milk. "Those men recognized it." "Why?" Tobias ceased chewing, his jaw working slowly around a mouthful of bread. For a fleeting moment she believed he might confide in her, then his face became an impenetrable mask. "I ain't got no family, ain't got no name worth knowing." But Nora had raised a son. She could discern the difference between truth and pain cloaked in defiance. This child carried secrets that dwarfed his small stature. As twilight descended, bathing her kitchen in hues of orange and gold, Tobias pushed himself away from the table. "I gotta go." "Where? Where does a 12-year-old boy find refuge when darkness falls in a place like this?" He shrugged, attempting to appear nonchalant. "I manage fine on my own." Nora thought of her own son. How he would seek refuge in her lap during thunderstorms. How fragile and vulnerable children appeared when they believed no one was observing them. "You could stay here tonight. I have a spare room upstairs." The raw yearning that flashed across Tobias's face was so profound it nearly shattered her heart. But then he shook his head vehemently. "Can't. They'll come looking. And when they find me here..." He met her gaze. And for the first time since their encounter, he appeared as the terrified child he truly was. "Lady, you don't understand what you've gotten yourself into." Before she could respond, a sharp rap echoed through the shop. Not the polite knock of a customer, but the forceful bang of someone wielding authority and fueled by anger. Tobias paled. "Hide me," he pleaded. "Please." Nora gestured towards the pantry. "In there. Don't make a sound." She smoothed her skirt and advanced to the front door, her heart pounding against her ribs. Through the glass, she could discern Deputy Marshal Wade Langston, accompanied by two men she didn't recognize. Their expressions were grim, resolute. "Evening, Mrs. Caldwell," Wade greeted as she opened the door. "Mind if we come in?" It was a rhetorical question. They brushed past her into the shop, their eyes scrutinizing every corner as if hunting a dangerous quarry. "We heard you might have had a visitor today," Wade continued, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "A certain young troublemaker." "I serve many customers," Nora replied, pleased that her voice remained steady. "You'll have to be more specific." One of the strangers, a man with silver hair and tailored clothes, stepped forward. "The Mercer boy. We know he was here." The way he uttered the name sent a shiver down her spine. It was laced with hatred, ancient and festering, but also with underlying fear. "I don't know anyone by that name," she lied. Wade's smile was as cold as a winter wind. "Mrs. Caldwell, you're new to the way things work in Copper Creek. Some names carry weight around here. Some names bring trouble that decent folks don't want any part of." "What kind of trouble could a starving child possibly bring?" The silver-haired man laughed, devoid of amusement. "That boy isn't just any orphan, lady. He's the last living relic of something this town has desperately tried to bury." From the pantry emanated the faintest sound, like a mouse scurrying. Wade's head snapped toward the noise, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. But before he could take a step, the ground began to tremble, subtly at first, then with increasing intensity like distant thunder rolling across the plains. Horse hooves, a multitude of them, approaching rapidly. The silver-haired man's face turned ashen. "They couldn't have found us this quickly." "Who couldn't have found you?" Nora demanded. But the men were already retreating toward the door. "Ma'am," Wade said, his arrogance replaced by palpable fear. "If you're smart, you'll lock this place up tight and keep your head down. What's coming to Copper Creek tonight? It ain't for folks like you." They vanished into the darkness, leaving Nora alone with her racing heart and the crescendoing thunder of approaching horses. Through her window, she witnessed lights emerging on the horizon, growing closer like fallen stars. The thunder of hooves reached a deafening roar as Nora pressed her face against the glass. What she witnessed sent a chill to her very bones. 300 women on horseback rode into Copper Creek like an avenging force from another realm. They wore black dusters that billowed behind them like wings, their faces obscured by wide-brimmed hats. Each carried a rifle across her saddle, and their horses moved with military precision through the town's unpaved streets. Tobias emerged from the pantry, his face pale but resolute. "They came," he whispered, his voice a mixture of terror and hope. "The sisters actually came." "Sisters? What sisters?" But before he could elaborate, the riders began to form a circle around the principal buildings of Copper Creek. This was not haphazard. This was strategic, calculated. They were encircling the town as if they'd practiced it countless times. Nora watched, mesmerized, as townsfolk emerged from their homes and businesses, drawn by the earth-shattering arrival. Men who had been drinking in the saloon stumbled into the street, their firearms forgotten in the face of this unprecedented spectacle. Women clutched their children tightly, uncertain whether to flee or stare in disbelief. At the heart of the formation, a single rider detached herself from the group. She was tall and imposing, her black duster adorned with silver conchos that captured the moonlight. As she removed her hat, Nora gasped. The woman's hair was pure white, braided with leather and feathers, but her face was ageless, possessing a beauty that seemed almost ethereal. The white-haired woman's voice resonated across the entire town as she spoke, clear and forceful as a church bell. "People of Copper Creek, I am Magdalena Cross of the Sisters of Justice. We ride tonight in search of one who has been wronged, one whose blood cries out for retribution." Deputy Marshal Wade emerged from his office, flanked by a dozen men armed with rifles, but even with their weapons, they appeared small and intimidated facing this feminine army. "You have no jurisdiction here," Wade declared, his voice cracking slightly. "This is a lawful town with lawful business." Magdalena's laugh was like the chime of silver wind bells in a tempest. "Lawful? Is it lawful to hunt a child like a wild animal? Is it lawful to bury the truth so deeply that even God weeps for justice?" She urged her horse forward, and Wade's men actually retreated. "We know about the boy. We know what he represents, and we know what you've tried to conceal." From her window, Nora could see the faces in the crowd shifting, confused murmurs spreading like wildfire. Whatever these sisters knew, it was unfamiliar to most of the townspeople. Magdalena raised her hand, and instantly every sister drew her rifle in perfect unison. The metallic click of 300 weapons being cocked echoed through the night, a deadly percussion. "Tobias Mercer!" Magdalena called out, her voice seeming to penetrate every corner of the town. "Son of Rebecca, grandson of Chief Standing Bear, heir to the Mercer legacy, we have come to bring you home." The revelation struck the crowd with stunning force. Nora heard gasps, witnessed people stumbling backward as if the words themselves had inflicted physical blows. She turned to look at Tobias, but his face had undergone a transformation. The frightened, hungry orphan had vanished. In his place stood a boy who suddenly looked older, prouder, his spine ramrod straight, but his eyes were brimming with tears. "They killed her," he said simply. "They killed my mother, and they thought they killed me too." Tobias's words hung in the air, heavy and pregnant with unspoken truths. Nora felt the world tilt beneath her feet as pieces of a horrifying puzzle fell into place. "Your mother," she whispered. "Rebecca Mercer. What happened to her?" But outside, Magdalena Cross was already answering that question for the entire town. Her voice cut through the night air like a honed blade. 5 years ago, Rebecca Mercer came to this town seeking justice for her people. She carried documents proving that the Copper Creek mine was erected on sacred burial grounds, stolen from the Lakota through forged treaties and murdered witnesses. The silver-haired man from earlier, the one who had been hunting Tobias, stepped forward from the crowd. His face was ashen but defiant. That woman was a half-breed rabble-rouser, spreading lies about legitimate land purchases. Magdalena's laugh was colder than the touch of death. "Legitimate, Chester Whitmore? Is that what you call bribing officials and murdering tribal elders?" Nora recognized the name now. Chester Whitmore controlled the majority of shares in the Copper Creek mine, the lifeblood of the town's economy. She had served him coffee countless times, never suspecting the blood that stained his wealth. "Rebecca came seeking justice," Magdalena continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the town. "Instead, she found a bullet in the back on a desolate road outside of town, and her 4-year-old son, who witnessed everything, was left for dead in a ravine." Tobias pressed against the window beside Nora, his small hands clenched into fists. "I crawled for 2 days before someone found me, spent 3 years in an orphanage in Denver, too scared to tell anyone my real name. When I finally came back here, looking for answers, looking for justice. They tried to finish what they started. Understanding flooded through Nora. Outside, the confrontation was escalating. Chester Whitmore had drawn a gun, and several of his men followed suit. But the sisters remained unfazed. If anything, they seemed to welcome the challenge. "You want a war, old man?" Magdalena asked, her rifle trained steadily on Chester's chest. "Because that's precisely what you'll get if you don't start confessing the truth." Deputy Marshal Wade stepped between them, his badge glinting under the moonlight. "Now hold on, this is still my town, and I won't allow a single shot to be fired." Wade's hat flew off his head, revealing gray hair beneath. The bullet had missed him by inches, a warning that could not be ignored. Magdalena hadn't moved, but smoke drifted from the barrel of her rifle. "Your town, deputy. Funny thing about that, we did some digging before we arrived. Turns out you've been accepting payments from the mine for the last 5 years. The same amount of time since Rebecca Mercer died." Wade's face became as white as freshly fallen snow. Around the square, townspeople began whispering, piecing together the puzzle. The deputy they'd trusted, the mine that provided employment for half the town, the mysterious death of a woman most of them had never met. "She's lying," Wade said, but his voice sounded like brittle ice. "I never took no bribes." One of the sisters rode forward, holding up a leather saddlebag. "Bank records tell a different story, deputy. $50 a month every month since Rebecca Mercer's murder. Funny how that's exactly what Chester Whitmore pays for protection services." The crowd was turning now. Nora could see it in their expressions, the shift from confusion to anger to betrayal. These were hard-working individuals who earned honest wages, trusted their leaders, raised their children to uphold justice. The realization that their town was built on murder and deceit was shattering their foundation. Chester Whitmore raised his gun toward Magdalena, his face distorted with rage and desperation. "You have no proof of anything." No court in this territory would take the word of a bunch of outlaw women over respected businessmen. Magdalena smiled then, and it was a beautiful and terrifying sight. "Who mentioned anything about courts, Chester?" That was when Nora noticed something that caused her heart to skip a beat. Every single sister had her rifle aimed at a different man in the crowd. Not random targets, but specific individuals, as if they had known exactly who they were targeting before setting foot in Copper Creek. The standoff stretched, taut like a wire about to snap, 300 rifles against perhaps 30 townsmen, but the true battle raged in the hearts and minds of the onlookers. Nora witnessed it in real time. The faces she'd served coffee to every morning were shifting from confusion to recognition to horror. These weren't outlaws disrupting their peaceful community. These were women seeking justice for crimes that had been hidden in plain sight. "Listen to me, all of you," Magdalena declared, her voice reaching every corner of the square. "The Sisters of Justice are not here to harm innocent people. We're here for the guilty. We're here for the men who thought they could murder a woman and her child for money and power." Baker Thompson stepped forward from the crowd, his face contorted with desperation. "You can't just ride into our town and start making accusations. Rebecca Mercer was just some drifter woman and her brat." Another gunshot echoed through the night. This time the bullet struck the ground inches from Thompson's feet, sending up a spray of dirt and pebbles. The baker stumbled backward, his face white with terror. "That woman," said a new voice from among the sisters, "was my daughter." The rider who spoke removed her hat, revealing features undeniably similar to Tobias. High cheekbones, dark eyes, and an aura of quiet strength that spoke of Lakota heritage. But her face was etched with years of sorrow and rage. "My name is Sarah Standing Bear," she continued, urging her horse forward. "Rebecca was my only child, and that boy you've been hunting like an animal is my grandson." The revelation sent shockwaves through the crowd. This was no longer simply about justice. This was about family, about blood, about a grandmother who had spent 5 long years tracking down her daughter's killers. Tobias pressed against the window beside Nora, tears streaming down his face. "Grandmother," he whispered. "She found me." Chester Whitmore's desperation was palpable. He swung his gun wildly between the sisters, searching for any advantage. "You have no authority here. This is American territory, not some savage reservation." The words were barely spoken when Sarah Standing Bear's rifle spoke. The bullet neatly removed Chester's gun from his hand, the weapon spinning away into the darkness. He cradled his stinging fingers, staring at the woman who had just proven she could have killed him as easily as disarmed him. "Savage!" Sarah's voice was lethally calm. "You murdered my daughter in cold blood and left her 4-year-old son to die in a ravine. You stole land that belonged to my people for generations. You corrupted lawmen and silenced witnesses. And you dare call me savage?" Deputy Wade attempted to flee back to his office, presumably seeking reinforcements or an escape. But 3 sisters swiftly moved to intercept him, their horses circling him like wolves surrounding trapped prey. The circle was closing. The guilty were being separated from the innocent. And somewhere in her kitchen, Nora realized she was about to witness either an extraordinary act of justice or a bloody massacre in Copper Creek's history. Tobias stepped away from the window, his young face set with a determination that aged him beyond his 12 years. Nora reached out to him, but he shook his head. "I have to go out there," he said softly. "They came for me. My grandmother came for me. I can't hide anymore." Before Nora could intervene, he was walking toward the front door. She followed, her heart pounding with terror and pride in equal measure. This boy, this brave, resilient child, was about to confront the men who had destroyed his world. The back door of her shop opened directly onto the town square. As Tobias stepped into the moonlight, a silence descended upon the entire crowd. 300 women on horseback, 30 frightened townsmen, and hundreds of onlookers all focused on the small figure walking steadily toward the center of the square. "Grandmother?" Tobias called out, his voice surprisingly strong. "I'm here." Sarah Standing Bear's composure wavered for a brief moment. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks as she saw her grandson alive, walking, breathing, but her rifle remained unwavering. "My brave boy," she whispered, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You survived. You came back." Chester Whitmore, cradling his injured hand, regarded Tobias with unconcealed hatred. "That little savage should have died with his mother. Would have saved us all a lot of trouble." The words were barely out of his mouth when Magdalena Cross reacted. Her horse surged forward, bringing her alongside Chester. The barrel of her rifle pressed against his temple. "Say another word," she whispered, her voice carrying in the deadly silence. "Give me a reason." But Tobias had stopped walking. He stood in the center of the square, appearing small and vulnerable beneath the immense night sky. When he spoke, his voice resonated across the entire town. "5 years ago, my mother came here seeking justice for our people. She had paper documents, proof that this mine was built on stolen land, sacred burial grounds where my ancestors rest." He turned to face the crowd of townspeople, many of whom worked in the very mine he was discussing. "She didn't come seeking war. She came seeking what was right. She wanted to reach an agreement, find a way for everyone to prosper without dishonoring the dead." Chester spat blood into the dirt. "Your mother was a half-breed troublemaker who didn't understand how the world worked." "This time," Tobias responded, his young voice sharp as a shard of glass, "my mother was a teacher. She spoke 4 languages and understood legal documents better than most lawyers. She understood precisely how your world operates, Mr. Whitmore. That's why you had to murder her." A murmur rippled through the crowd. These were not the words of a savage child. This was someone who had lived with the truth for 5 years, who had had ample time to grasp precisely what had been taken from him the night of her death. Tobias continued, "I was hiding in the back of her wagon. I saw everything." Deputy Wade, who had been attempting to sneak back to his office, froze in his tracks. His face turned gray as desert sand. "I saw Mr. Whitmore signal to you, Deputy. I saw you emerge from behind the rocks. I saw you shoot my mother in the back as she tried to ride away." The crowd erupted. Shouts of anger, disbelief, and betrayal filled the night air. Wade drew his gun, swinging it wildly between Tobias and the sisters. "The boy is lying. He was 4 years old, traumatized. He couldn't possibly remember anything clearly." "I remember everything," Tobias stated simply. "Every word, every face, every detail, including what you did to me after you thought she was dead." Sarah Standing Bear moved her horse closer to her grandson, protective and proud. "Tell them, child. Tell them what these men did to you." Tobias looked directly at Deputy Wade, and in that moment, the frightened orphan vanished completely. In his place stood a young man bearing the weight of truth, the power of justice. "You threw me in that ravine while I was still alive. You told Mr. Whitmore I was dead, but I wasn't. I crawled for 2 days with a broken arm and a head wound, drinking rainwater and eating grass until a traveling preacher found me." Deputy Wade's hand trembled as he kept his gun trained on Tobias. Sweat poured down his face despite the cool night air, and his voice cracked as he spoke. "You can't prove anything, boy. It's your word against mine. And who will believe a half-breed orphan over a sworn lawman?" Magdalena Cross laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "That's where you're mistaken, Deputy. We didn't ride 300 miles just based on the word of a child." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a thick leather portfolio. "We have the testimony of Father Miguel Santos, the preacher who found Tobias dying in that ravine. We have bank records confirming your payments from the mine. We have witness statements from tribal elders who saw Rebecca ride into town that night." Wade's face went white as a bone. "Those papers are worthless. No court would—" "And we have this," Sarah Standing Bear interrupted, holding up a small metal object that glinted in the moonlight. "The bullet that killed my daughter. I dug it out of her spine myself when I buried her in secret. The markings match your service revolver perfectly, Deputy." The crowd was becoming volatile. Men who had trusted Wade, shared drinks with him, relied on him to protect their families, now stared at him with growing rage and betrayal. Some were reaching for their own weapons, but Nora couldn't determine whether they intended to defend Wade or aid the sisters. Chester Whitmore made his choice. Despite his injured hand, he lunged for a fallen gun, desperation overriding reason. But Baker Thompson was quicker, kicking the weapon away and standing over his former partner. "Chester, you son of a—" Thompson snarled. "I knew Rebecca Mercer was murdered, but I thought it was bandits. You made me an accessory to child murder." The betrayal within betrayal sent shockwaves through the remaining conspirators. Wade swung his gun toward Thompson, his face contorted with panic and rage. "Shut your mouth, Thompson! We all profited from this!" "Every man in this town became rich off that mine." "Not every man," came a voice from the crowd. Dr. Samuel Hayes stepped forward, his medical bag in hand. "Some of us tried to treat that boy's injuries when he was brought in, half dead. Some of us asked questions about the source of those wounds." More voices joined in. The blacksmith, the preacher, the school teacher, individuals who had harbored suspicions but never possessed confirmation, who had lived with guilt and uncertainty for 5 years. The conspiracy was unraveling like a rope fraying under excessive strain. Wade's panic reached a crescendo. He spun toward Tobias, his finger tightening on the trigger. "If I'm going down, that little bastard is coming with me." Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Nora watched in horror as Wade's gun swung toward the boy. Sarah Standing Bear screamed her grandson's name. Magdalena Cross raised her rifle, but it was Tobias himself who acted first. Instead of running or ducking, he stepped forward directly into Wade's line of fire, his young voice ringing out with absolute clarity. "Go ahead, Deputy. Show everyone what kind of man you truly are. Murder a child in front of 300 witnesses. Prove to this entire town that the Sisters of Justice were right to come here." Wade's finger froze on the trigger. Around the square, dozens of townspeople had drawn their own weapons, every single one aimed at him. The moment stretched into an eternity. Wade's gun trembled in his grip, pointed at Tobias's chest, while 300 rifles and dozens of townsfolk's weapons targeted him. The deputy's eyes darted frantically around the square, searching for an escape that did not exist. "You're surrounded, Wade," Magdalena said quietly. "But we're not executioners. Lower your weapon and you will receive a fair trial. Continue to point it at that boy, and these good people of Copper Creek may decide to administer justice themselves." A murmur of agreement rose from the crowd, like distant thunder. These were not outlaws or vigilantes speaking. These were fathers and mothers, shopkeepers and miners, people who had built their lives on the belief that right and wrong mattered. Wade's resolve crumbled. The gun slipped from his shaking fingers and hit the dirt with a thud. Instantly, 2 sisters dismounted and moved to secure him, their movements efficient and practiced. Chester Whitmore made one final desperate attempt. "You people don't understand. That mine employs half of this town. If the tribal claims are validated, if production ceases, you will all lose everything. Dr. Hayes stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of education and wisdom. Chester, some things are more important than money, like not building our prosperity on the murdered woman and children. The crowd murmured in agreement, but Nora could see the apprehension in their faces. These were practical people with families to support. The moral victory was essential, but so was survival. Tobias seemed to grasp their predicament. He walked to the center of the square, his young voice carrying unexpected authority. "My grandmother and the tribal council do not wish to destroy this town," he announced. "My mother came here seeking partnership, not vengeance. The mine can continue to operate, but as a joint venture, the profits shared, the land respected, and the burial grounds protected." Sarah Standing Bear nodded with pride. "The boy speaks the truth. We seek justice, not destruction. But the men responsible for the murder must face the consequences." Magdalena Cross produced an official-looking document. "We have already drafted new partnership agreements, fair wages, shared profits, and guaranteed protection for sacred sites. All perfectly legal under territorial law." The relief that washed over the crowd was palpable. Justice could be served without destroying innocent lives. The guilty would be held accountable, but the community could heal and prosper. As dawn broke over Copper Creek, Wade and Chester were loaded into a prisoner wagon, bound for the territorial capital and a fair trial. The bank records, witness testimony, and physical evidence would ensure conviction. Tobias stood beside his grandmother's horse, no longer the frightened orphan who had begged for bread the day before. He looked up at Nora, who had remained near her shop throughout the long night. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the bread, for the kindness, for not turning away when it would have been easier." Nora knelt down to his level, tears welling in her eyes. "What will you do now?" "Go home," he replied, gesturing toward the horsewomen who had become his family. "Learn my people's ways. Honor my mother's memory. Ensure that this never happens to anyone else." Sarah Standing Bear offered Nora her hand. "You showed kindness to my grandson when he had nothing. That makes you family. You will always have a place among the Lakota should you ever need it." As the Sisters of Justice prepared to ride out, their mission accomplished, Magdalena Cross approached Nora one last time. "You did something remarkable yesterday," she said. "You saw a hungry child and fed him, not knowing that it would change everything." That's how justice truly works. Not through grand displays, but through small acts of courage when no one is watching. The sun rose completely over Copper Creek as the riders disappeared into the distance, taking Tobias home to his people. The town was irrevocably changed, but not ruined. Justice had been served. Truth had been revealed, and a community had learned that prosperity built on the suffering of others could never endure. Nora stood in her doorway watching the dust settle, knowing she had witnessed something extraordinary. Sometimes the most potent forces in the world arrive not as armies or politicians, but as hungry children seeking bread. Years later, the Copper Creek mine became the most prosperous and peaceful operation in the territory, with tribal and settler families working side by side. Tobias grew up to become a tribal advocate and lawyer, ensuring his mother's vision of justice through partnership became a reality throughout the West. And Nora's bakery became a symbol in the town, a reminder that kindness to strangers could change the world. So there you have it. A small act of kindness, a young boy's courage, and a force for justice riding in to right the wrongs of a town built on secrets and lies. The story of Copper Creek reminds us that even in the darkest of times, one person can make a difference, and that the truth, however painful, can ultimately set us free. It shows us that even in the face of overwhelming power, the pursuit of justice and the unwavering belief in the inherent goodness of humanity can ultimately prevail. What did you think of Tobias's choice? What moment in the story resonated most with you? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and answer any questions you have. And if you enjoyed this tale of courage, resilience, and the power of community, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more stories of hope and inspiration coming your way. Thanks for watching.